Good afternoon, everybody. My name is David Harrison Stevens. I was born in 1884 in a small town in Wisconsin. But my parents actually grew up in Huntington County, Pennsylvania. And each of their families was grievously affected by the Civil War. My mother's older brother was killed during McClellan's botched Peninsula Campaign in 1862. And my father's father was killed during the Battle of the Wilderness in 1864. My father was 14 years old when he got the news that his father had been killed. He was fishing. He put down his fishing pole and went straight home to comfort his mother and three older sisters. Fortunately, one of his uncles saw that my father had academic promise and supported him through Dickinson College and then Drew Theological Seminary, which had been founded by the financier Daniel Drew after the Civil War in an effort to mend the schism in the Methodist Church that had developed over the issue of slavery. In 1880, when my father graduated from the seminary, he promptly married my mother, and the two of them moved west to Wisconsin to start life as a Methodist minister. They told us at the time they had only the clothes they were carrying, $50, and 2 roast chickens. Now, at the time, Methodist ministers were only supposed to stay at the same pastorate for 3 years. So my older brother and my older sister and I grew up in a series of towns in Wisconsin, starting with Plover, where my siblings were, Berlin, where I was born, Oshkosh, Lake Mills, Janesville, Evansville, and finally Fort Atkinson. And it was only when we moved to Fort Atkinson that for the first time in my life I lived in a house that had indoor plumbing and indoor toilets. The house in Evansville was so rudimentary that it didn't even have floorboards. The floor consisted only of hard, packed, bare earth. And it was so cold during the winter, that Father would stuff extra straw under the mattresses to give us a little more insulation. I enjoyed school and I did well, and I won a scholarship to Lawrence University, from which I graduated with the class of 1906 at the age of 22. And I stayed on at Lawrence to get a master's degree in English literature, and my particular interest was John Milton. I taught English composition at Northwestern for the next 2 years, and then I went to Harvard for additional schooling. And from there I went to the University of Chicago to work on a PhD. I was awarded the PhD in 1914, and I was also given an opportunity to join the University of Chicago faculty in the English department, where I started in 1915 and stayed for the next 15 years, with the exception of 1 year during World War I, 1918, when I was a captain in the U.S. Army and worked in Washington, D.C. for Army Intelligence. In Chicago, I became chairman of the department, and then I became dean of the College of Arts and Sciences. And in 1930, when I was 46 years old, I was given and accepted a fabulous offer from the Rockefeller Foundation to go to the New York City area and become head of its humanities department. My job consisted primarily of reviewing grant applications, giving away the foundation's money, and then monitoring the programs to make sure they had in fact been worthwhile. And my particular interest was to see whether we could use the new medium of radio for educational and cultural purposes, and not just entertainment. I retired from the foundation in 1950 at the age of 65, and the next thing I did was to work on my 6th book called The Changing Humanities, which was published in 1953. Now I can imagine you all thinking to yourselves, well, David, this is all well and good, but what, if anything, does it have to do with Ephraim and Door County? And I'm happy to answer that question. In 1915, the year I was married and my first year on the Chicago faculty, a colleague mentioned that he thought Door County was a wonderful and generally not yet discovered paradise. So at the end of the school year, at the beginning of the summer, my wife and I drove up in our Model T to look around, and we fell in love. We bought our first property in the summer of 1915, what is now North Coral Hill Road. It was a log cabin for which we paid $100. And over the next years, we added to our real estate holdings. In 1921, I was given an opportunity to buy 200 feet of shoreline just north of Ephraim for what was then the staggering price of $10 a front foot. Now, $2,000 was more than my annual salary at the time at the University of Chicago. So I had to borrow money to make this purchase. And one of the people that lent me money was my good friend, Dr. Jim Reed. And there are still reeds down on the shoreline. By the time we moved to Door County permanently in the 1950s, we had attracted a number of our relatives to come join us here, at least during the summers. On my side of the family, my sister Annie Stevens Kirkland had a cottage right next to ours on the shore. She had children and grandchildren, and there are still Kirklands who live in Utah. On my wife's side of the family, her maiden sister Mary Davis bought land on what is now North Orchard Road in the 1930s. And her brother, Dick Davis, and his wife also bought land on North Orchard Road in the 1930s. They had children and grandchildren, one of whom is here today. And as for me and my wife, we had 3 children who loved Door County summers, and each of them had 3 children. And there are some of their children still live in Ephraim, even permanently. You may be familiar with the names McCutcheon, Vogler, Dukart, and Monroe. Having all the grandchildren around was a special treat for me in my retirement years. I'm told that I had a reputation as rather a stern and austere person, but that there was usually a twinkle in my eye when I played with the grandchildren. It may not surprise you, given my academic background, that one of the things my wife and I thought Ephraim needed when we came here permanently was a library. So in the 1950s, we donated some money and persuaded the village board to start a library. I hired the first librarian, Ms. Ernest Sowers, and for many years my photograph hung inside the library right over the door. And I suspect it was because of my service to the community in connection with the library that I had the honor of being elected Ephraim's 4th Fearball Chief in 1968. That honor meant a lot to me because I believe I was the first Fearball Chief that hadn't actually grown up in Ephraim, but had just come here as a summer resident. And for all the years thereafter, all the extended members of my family would refer to me behind my back and even to my face as the chief. I will end my prepared remarks by telling you about an accident in which I was involved on a crisp October day in October of 1974. I was out doing yard work on our bluff property. I was cutting branches and raking leaves, and I lost my footing, and I fell over the slope of the bluff down to what is now North Shore Road. I broke 2 ribs, and I punctured a lung, and I lay there for some time in intense pain. But nobody came along to help me, and I realized my only real choice was to crawl back up the bluff about 1/3 of a mile to my house where we could call for help. At the time, people thought the fall was going to kill me, but I'm glad to say it didn't, and I lived for another 6 years. During my recuperation, my family doctor suggested that I should think about taking a glass of sherry every night before dinner. Well, you have to understand what a controversial suggestion that was to me. I was a lifelong teetotaler. My father, as a Methodist minister, had preached against the evils of alcohol, and in fact had been threatened by the saloon keepers in the town of Burlington. My mother was actually a delegate to the Wisconsin Women's Christian Temperance Union. And on my wife's side of the family, her mother-in-law was actually national secretary of the Women's Christian Temperance Union. So we always voted prohibitionists. And one of the reasons we picked Ephraim to live in, as opposed to other villages in Door County, was because it was dry. And as a matter of fact, even when my children grew up as adults, if they would give a cocktail party to which they knew I would be coming, they would hide the liquor, and I would pretend not to notice what they were doing. But I have to tell you that I took my doctor's suggestion to have a nightly glass of sherry, and for the rest of my life, before dinner, almost every night, I would have a glass of sherry, and I greatly enjoyed it. Thank you.
Welcome this afternoon. I'm Ole Larsen all the way from Norway, you see. And I'm going to tell you first a little bit about my life in Norway before I came to the New World. So, I started on a farm in Norway. My dad was a farmer. And of course on a farm you have to know everything because there's nobody else to fix whatever goes haywire. And a piece of haywire you can fix anything with. And I learned how to be a blacksmith as well. So with those traits in farming, I had thoughts of going to the New World. But I found me a wife first, and I married her, and 2 years she passed away. So I had to find me another wife, but I did. And I found another wife, and we had 5 children. And I kind of convinced her to go to the New World. And she said, Ole, if you want to go, we'll go. Just before we left from Norway, she passed away. So here I am with 5 children and no wife. So I said to Pauline, my middle daughter, she said, Dad, you know, if you want to go to the New World, we go with you. So with that, I said, okay, we'll go to the New World. So we did. And we come into New York at the port of entry, and there was a steamboat. And, well, where does that steamer go? Well, that runs up to Albany, New York. Well, okay, kids, we get on that boat, and we're going to go up to Albany. So we went to Albany, and all of a sudden, now where we're going to go? Whoa, there's a barge here, pulled by horses, up the Erie Barge Canal. Well, that goes up to Buffalo, New York. Well, we get to Buffalo, New York, and there isn't a place to stay. So I, Ole Larsen, decided I should build a rooming house. So we built the rooming house so people had some place to stay when they came up to Buffalo. And with the rooming house, there was people trying to farm and they broke equipment, so I started another blacksmith shop. And from that, the government found out I was smarter than the average because I could speak English and Norwegian. So I got the job of writing homestead grants and for the foreigners that were coming here. So that's how I was employed. And all of a sudden I'm in my office one morning and I heard an awful clatter of Norwegians down by the barge. I said, what's going on? Oh, there's a group of Norwegians. So I went down and greeted them, and who should be on that barge but Iverson, Reverend Iverson and his wife. Well, Iverson said, I'm a Moravian minister, and I said, I'm a Moravian too, Reverend Iverson. Why don't you come to my rooming house and stay? So I put him up overnight in my rooming house. But he said, I'm on a mission. I'm going to Bethlehem, Pennsylvania to get a $500 grant for starting a mission church. So I got to take off to go to Bethlehem. Well, while Iverson left and went to Bethlehem, I, by this time, had found me another wife. But we weren't married. But he come back from Bethlehem, Iverson, and I said, Reverend Iverson, you want to marry us before you leave and go to Milwaukee? And he said, oh yeah, I'll marry you. So we got married. Iverson took off from Milwaukee. I left and went to Fort Howard in Green Bay. That's where the tanks were, the first Moravians in Green Bay. And today there's Heritage Hills. It has got the whole settlement and history. And if you haven't been there, it's a place to go and you enjoy it. Anyway, I stopped in Green Bay, and the Indians convinced me, Ole, you got to go up the peninsula. There's a beautiful island up there. So with that, I left and went up to the island. I took one look at it. Beautiful bay. I'm going back to get the rest of my family, and we're coming up here, set roots on Horseshoe Island. So I did, and we cut wood for building a log cabin. We built a pier so the steamers could come in and get some pulpwood so we could sell that to them. We gained our revenue. And as the time went on, I was going back and forth to Green Bay, and I bumped into Reverend Iverson again. And I said, Reverend Iverson, have you got a place for that mission church? No, he said, I haven't got a place. Well, I think you should come up and take a look at this beautiful bay by my island. So 2 years later, Iverson comes knocking on my door in February. He and Onison and another gentleman walked all the way from Green Bay to Horseshoe Island. And they had across cracks in the ice, and you could fell in, and if you get wet when you're out there, it wouldn't be good. So anyway, they finally got to Ole's place on Horseshoe Island. They come knocking on the door, and my wife greeted them and brought them in and fed them, bedded them down, and the next morning we went in and founded Ephraim. That was in 1853, and that's what the Ephraim founding is on any sign that you see is 1853. So after we got to find Ephraim, now we got to go and get a grant or a deed or whatever for the property. 425 acres, Iverson bought for $478. So I think people are rolling over their grave what the prices of Ephraim are today. But anyway, getting back to Iverson and Ole Larsen, and then they started cutting trees and making the parsonage. And there was a couple other fellows that Ole Larsen, bumped into on our way from Green Bay, and one was Kittie Weborg and one was Bubba Nielsen. That's where Weberg's Point and Nelson's Point in the Peninsula State Park. That's where we landed. So anyway, Ole knew that he had met these people, and they were, Kittie Weborg was a cooper, a barrel maker that made barrels so they could put the fish in the barrel and salt them down to keep them. So he said, I'm going back to Norway and get the rest of my family to come over here, because he had met Increase Claflin, was the founder of Door County in Fish Creek. And he said, the Increase, is there any fish in these waters? Oh yeah, Increase said, lots of fish in these waters. So Peter went back to Norway. But anyway, Ole stayed on Horseshoe Island. Well, then he was, like I said, he raised his family there. And all of a sudden in 1858, there was an epidemic of cholera. And a lot of the people died. The ones of my next of kin passed away. There is no ground on Horseshoe Island to bury them. So I convinced Reverend Iverson, on this acreage you got, can I look for a place to start God's Acre? And where you're sitting today, this is where I, Ole Larsen, found ground enough to make God's Acre, and that's where we're at today. And as we went on, we built the parsonage. That old Norwegian, he was a stubborn Norwegian. He had to have a 24 by 36 log cabin. That's a big log cabin. But he had something up here that Ole didn't have, because he thought the parsonage is going to have to be the meeting place for church. Well, as families come with 20, 25 in a bunch or more, they came from the north and south, east and west, and that was the only place of worship. So then they started building the church when it got to be that big, and they built the church down by the water, and it's like it is now. They got their feet wet and moved the church up the hill, and that's where the middle of the church and the sanctuary, that is the piece of house or church they moved up from down by the water. So after they got it moved up there in 1883, so that was a few years after founding of Ephraim. But that's the way the water level goes up and down on cycles. But anyway, I, Ole Larsen, decided, well, there is no ground on Horseshoe Island, so I'm going to go find some ground. So I went over into now, which is the park, the camping grounds in the park for group camping. And I found out under the Niagara Escarpment, when the glacier melted, there was some ground. So I cleared the property and made fields so we could raise some crops. And today, if you go over there in the group area, you will find a stone with a plaque on it that says Here I, Ole Larsen, re-resurrected my log cabin because I took it down piece by piece on Horseshoe Island and floated it across and put it back together in the park. So thank you for coming. You've been a good audience. Got any questions, quick? But anyway, we're glad you could be with us. And it's been a blessing to you listening to me as it's been me giving it to you. Have a good day. So,
Kittie. Well, she said quite a lot. My name is Kittie Valentine. I was born in Sturgeon Bay, and that's 30 miles south of here, to a family by the name of Nebo, who were in a heavy construction business. And I want to tell you, I grew up with music around me. I took piano lessons at a young age. I learned to sing. I had so much music. I loved playing the piano. Do you like music?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yes, that's wonderful. I learned how to play hymns at first, and that's all I played. And then I played popular songs, and then I played jazz, and then I played honky tonk, and then I sing in the choir. It's a wonderful life, a wonderful life. And that's how I met my future husband, Ephraim Valentine. I must tell you, I was just in my teens in 1918, and I lived in Sturgeon Bay, of course, and Everett had to sing. He had a wonderful baritone voice, and everybody called him to sing at weddings and funerals, and he was asked to sing at a funeral in Sturgeon Bay. And at the very last minute, his accompanist got sick. So I was called, and of course I went. I didn't care. I would play for him. So I played for the funeral and met him in 1918. And I want to tell you, it had to be love at first sight. I still have his love letters. I have about that many love letters because we started talking and dating. And he went off to war in 1918. But guess what? In 1919, we were married. And we were married down at the Moravian Church, right down the hill. And that Moravian Church is still there, and right next door to it is the hotel that Ekberg and I run. It's called the Anderson Hotel. It sits between the two churches. I'll tell you about the name Anderson Hotel. I had a mother-in-law by the name of Kittie Valentine Anderson. I worked with my mother-in-law, Tilly, for many years, side by side with Everett in the hotel. Kittie Valentine Anderson came to Ephraim in 1898 with a little 7-year-old boy named Everett as a young widow from Milwaukee. She had just lost her husband, and she came to Ephraim to bury him here because his family had come from Ephraim. And she ended up buying a little cottage, which she called Stonewall Cottage. And she enlarged the cottage because people needed a place to go when they came to Ephraim. There was only one hotel here. So she opened her home and boarded people. Well, in 1906, she met another man. He was the most eligible bachelor in Ephraim. I must tell you, his name was Adolph Anderson. He was very wealthy. He owned most of the Anderson dock. He owned the Anderson store with his family, and they owned a lot of acreage, and so he was quite eligible. So Tilly married Adolph in 1909, and they had another child. They had a little boy named Henry, and our Henry has grown up to be a wonderful doctor, and we're so proud of him. It's a marvelous thing. And I have worked with Tilly all these years, and we worked together like a fine oiled machine. I had to, but she was this brusque woman, and she was very intimidating to everybody. And everybody was slightly afraid of her, but I worked with her very well. And she passed away in 1936. And I was just stopping today to do a little weeding on her grave because I'm on my way down to the market because I ordered 30 chickens for dinner tomorrow night from Arnold Soames. He had to butcher chickens, and I'm going down there to get them, but I believe I'll have to drive my car down there. I have so much to do today. But, you know, when Tilly got old, she had arthritis so bad, and she sat in the rocking chair, and she became a real curmudgeon. You know what a curmudgeon is? Well, she became one, and she sat and pounded her cane on the floor. And my little Eddie, my little son Eddie, was terrified of her. He always said that when he heard his grandmother banging her cane on the floor, he must have done something wrong. Well, he probably did. I have 2 children, Corrine and Eddie, and Corrine helps me a lot in the hotel. I want to tell you what a wonderful daughter she is, but that Eddie is a little scamp. Whenever I need him, he's never around. Do you know Eddie? Anyhow, I want to tell you about our orchard. You know, our hotel, we serve a lot of cherry products, and we not only sell our desserts, but I've started this little cookbook, and it's quite wonderful. I have all the recipes in here of our cherry recipes from Tilly and myself, and we're going to publish a few more pretty soon because they've been such a hit. Have you tried the steamed cherry pudding? Or possibly the cherry pie. Everybody comes for cherry pie. Peach pie? Oh, well, you know, if Josie comes tonight, I'm not sure she's coming to cook, but we might have to get Clara Seiler from the farm down tonight. And I don't know if my Uncle Bill Fobian will come to wash dishes or not. We have such a full schedule. And now, since Tilly has passed, Everett and I give costume parties on weekends. And I am so busy sewing costumes, and the maids join in, and the waitresses join in, and you know, some of the guests come back year after year so they can participate in our wonderful musical plays and programs that we have. And you know, the Birchinger Orchestra, I think, is coming tonight. They're from the Alpine Resort. And then, tomorrow night, if you get some reservations, we're having a special guest, little Suzanne Hansen. Do you remember her? She is the daughter of Adeline Hansen, and there are summer neighbors up here on the hill. And Suzanne is now an opera singer, and I want to tell you that girl has a fabulous voice, but you'd have to get reservations in quickly. Everett is still, I don't know where he is. I believe he's out spraying in the orchard. The cherry orchard is right up here on Town Line Road. And he's made enough money this year so he can get another boat and a motor. And he's got a dicker with Reuben Larsen down on the water for some shore space, which I'm sure he'll get. But do you know, have you seen the docks? They're sitting kind of low in the water this year. And I'll tell you something that I heard, and I had to have Everett write it down for me because I can't remember half of what is fact here, but this is important to tell you. Everett was talking to Mr. Tresice. You know Mr. Tresice, the surveyor? He's from Appleton. And Harold Wilson hired him to do some surveying up here, and he said something very interesting regarding the lake level this year. He said, taking a plan east and west out of Chicago as a hinge and extending up north of Escanaba, the entire lake bottom is rising up from Chicago to Escanaba at the rate of 3 inches in 100 years for every 100 miles, so that 200 miles from Chicago, the rise would be 8 inches. He said that this has been very definitely proven, which means that Lake Huron, Superior, and Michigan will all empty into the drainage canal within 1,000 years. He said this fact will very definitely affect the rise and fall of the water in the Ephraim Bay, as we are so far away from Chicago. Imagine that. That is something. Well, thank you so much, folks, for listening to me. I appreciate it.
Thank you. It was wonderful.
Nice to see you. It's a little cooler than it was during the last show because the sun has moved, so I hope you're all comfortable. As you heard, my name is Malinda Elizabeth Knudsen Mayhew. The Knudsen part came because I was born right here in Ephraim in 1907 to my father Peter Knudsen, who came from Norway at the age of 6, and to his wife Hulda, my mother, whose family came from Germany, so I was half German and half Norwegian. That's an odd juxtaposition, but it seemed to work. Everybody in both families were good cooks, and so when my father had been a young man, he decided he would go away to make money, and so that he would be able to purchase some land, and he sailed on the Great Lakes for many years in real sailboats. Often you use the word sail when it's a motor ship, but these were real sailboats, big, big ones. So when he came back after thinking that he'd sailed long enough, about 30 years old, he found that his younger sweetheart was still here and unmarried. Evidently she had waited for him. Her name was Hulda Seiler, and they lived up on the German road. And actually, my father had known her since she was a little child. When they came from Norway, they bought a house on the German road, which had been in the Knudsen family since that time for a long, long time, and has only recently been sold out of it. So that was pretty interesting. So here was this German lady and this Norwegian man trying to make a new couple, and it turns out that his new mother-in-law, my father's mother-in-law, had not a word of English. So he had to learn to speak German in order to get along. Well, my mother also learned to speak Norwegian just so that she could get along. There were many family members in that family who did speak English, but she wanted to learn it anyway. So I grew up understanding German very well, Norwegian a little. And the reason I understood the German so well was not because of my parents, but it was because in the summer when my parents were running their hotel, they employed Grandma, who only spoke German, to be my babysitter. Uncle Johnny would bring her down in the horse and buggy every morning, and she would alight and come down and take care of me, and then he would come and pick her up every evening after dinner. So I had to learn to speak German, and you know, when you're a little person, you learn these things kind of by accident. You just learn it. I learned a little Norwegian and a lot of German and English, so I was trilingual. It didn't last. Unfortunately, when I grew up, nobody spoke those languages anymore, and I also only spoke English, so I really lost it all. I could still speak a little Norwegian, but my granddaughter, Carey, went off to Norway and married somebody over there, and when I would go and visit, my new baby granddaughter said to her mom, my daughter, Grandma speaks Norwegian really funny. So I guess I had lost the ability to be able to speak it correctly, but she understood it. She got no, that was pretty clear. And she was a good little girl. I enjoyed reading to her. Well, as time went on, I went through high school and grade school here in Ephraim. And in grade school, I became very ill when I was in the 2nd grade. And I don't know what I had. Nobody ever told me the name of what I had. But I was sick enough that I had to leave school. So I missed 2nd grade. And I thought, well, I'm just going to have to start over. Whenever I get well and go back to school in the fall, I'll have to start over and begin second grade again. Well, one of my father and mother's guests at the Knudsen house said that was ridiculous. Make her come over here and visit me every day this summer. And she taught me enough so that when I went back to second grade the next year, they said, you can't be in second grade, you're going to go to third. So even though I should have gone to 8 grades of school, I only went to 7. And then off I went to Gibraltar High School, which was quite new. It was only a few years old when I was ready to go to high school. Prior to that, the only high school was in Sturgeon Bay or Marinette. The only way you could go to high school in those early days was to find somebody to board with, and then you wouldn't see your family for most of the year. Sturgeon Bay seemed a lot farther away in those days than it does now that we have automobiles, and certainly much farther away to Marinette. Mileage-wise, it's not much different, but it's not convenient to go over the lake and swim that far, so nobody liked when they had to go to Marinette. I was lucky to go to Gibraltar, and it really, in those days, kind of looked like a 2-story house. It was quite small. And we had a young teacher for English named Olga Wickman. She was wonderful. She made all of us love Shakespeare. I don't know if everybody learned Shakespeare when they were in high school, but we sure did. We learned poetry and actually had been memorizing poetry all through grade school, and they kept that up. Even when my children went to grade school, they had to learn a poem every week. Many of them stuck in our minds for all those years. Somebody will mention a poem to me even till now, and I will be able to tell you at least the first verse of it, which is interesting. Why do those things stay in our minds, I wonder? Something from so long ago, and will come back to you. Well, anyway, I had a very good education at Gibraltar High School, and then I thought I would like to go a little farther. I would like to become a nurse. Back in those days, if you were a woman, either nurse or teacher were your 2 options. So I loved nursing. I didn't want to be in school long enough to be a doctor, although I would have liked it. So I did become a nurse. I went to Milwaukee's Passavant Hospital for 3 years, and my father wasn't real happy about it because I didn't get the summers off like you do if you go to a regular college. We went all through the year in school, so I couldn't come up and help with the Knudsen house anymore. And when I graduated, I did floor nursing for a while, and then I did surgical nursing. I really enjoyed that. And then I did baby care. Oh my goodness, running a nursery, that was so much fun. And in fact, after I got married, Baylor Hospital contacted our sister Emma, who was my head teacher at nursing school, and said, do you know anybody who would be able to open a nursery at Baylor? We've never had one, and we thought we'd like to start one. And she said, yes, I have a good student that would be able to do it. So she contacted me and suggested that I do that. And I mentioned it to my father, and he said, well, you will be able to come home for summer to help in the hotel, won't you? The answer to that was no, so I didn't go to Baylor. But I had the pleasure of knowing that I had been asked. That was pretty fun. So my husband and I had purchased the Knudsen house from my parents, and we ran it for many years, and we made a few additions. We talked about smorgasbord, and I wondered if that would be something that we could do. We hadn't done it before. So we went to Norway on a trip just to look into things, and we decided there wasn't anything to that. A little extra work is all. So from then on, every Thursday night in each summer, we produced a beautiful smorgasbord, and we served so many people that we had to have 3 different settings. The dining room only held 45 or 50, and we did it 3 times in that night. The girls complained a lot because it's a lot of work to get ready. I can't tell you how much meatballs rolling we all did. If I never roll another meatball, I won't mind. But we had Swedish meatballs, we had Swedish creamed potatoes. Do you know what Jäktost is? That is a goat cheese. and it is the color of caramel candy. You can't imagine how many of our guests were surprised when they took a bite of it and found out it wasn't caramel at all. It was goat cheese. It was really quite good. It was about the color of your sweater, and we enjoyed it very much. Lots of different kinds of cheeses and cold cuts, and even though Ephraim was dry, our famous dessert was rum pudding. It was delicious. And there was never any left over, unfortunately, for the next day. There were always cookies left over, and I had a good friend who would come over and have them whenever she could. After I was married, we had 2 little girls, and those 2 little girls had an interesting life. My youngest one went to Norway to live, so we didn't get to see her very often. And my oldest one lived in Florida, and we later moved there because Tom really didn't like winter very well. So we had a lot of fun living in different places and meeting lots of wonderful people like all of you. Thank you so much for coming to visit me today.